So, Martin, how did you come about writing The Real Candleford Green?
Anne and I moved into this house and into this village, knew absolutely nothing about Lark Rise. And I should say there was nothing to indicate that Flora had ever lived or worked in the village at all. So there was a gradual process where I qualified as a local historian and started giving guided walks and talks. And it all went from there, really. I got my master's and then began to realise just how popular Lark Rise might be. I managed to produce a book in 2000, in fact, and that went on sale in the village hall here, and in the space of 20 minutes, 90 copies were sold, and it went from there. I mean, I think 1,500 copies probably sold along the way, which for someone of my sort of level is a lot.
And then in 2008, there was a new event.
Well, that was one of the biggest events in my life, I suppose, really. The filming, which went on from 2008 to 2010. There was general acclaim, but there were plenty of the hardliners who didn't like it. I thought they'd taken immense trouble to get everything right. And it was fabulous. Everybody wanted to walk the three villages, and I was run off my feet. I could do the two, Juniper Hill and Cosford, before lunch, then lunch in the pub, and get up energy and do Fringford in the afternoon.
So what sort of people came along?
Well, they could be WI groups, they could be smaller history groups, sometimes just a few individuals got together. So there was a great variation, really. Some groups much easier than others. I remember doing 2 back-to-back walks for 30 on each in a temperature of around 90 degrees. So those 3 years were the busiest time of my life, I think, actually. And everybody was lovely. I mean, the director came up here, and Queenie, Linda Bassett, came up here, and she dedicated a plaque in the church, which was the first indication that Flora had ever lived here. And by that time, people were getting very conscious. And a lot of local people, on Festival Day with us at the Candleford Festival in the summer. And there is a new signpost now to the village, now up on the green. And one of the images is Flora.
And then you decided to bring out a new book.
Yes. Well, the original book was rough and ready. It hadn't got an index, for instance, and it was very basic. By the time I got to here, that was 2015, I think, I had acquired a great deal more knowledge. That would include finding letters written by Keziah Wetton. Keziah Wetton ran the forge and the post office. She was daughter of a blacksmith and came in the late 50s, I think, to the village, and then took the post office on in 1880s, and was a huge character. I mean, she was huge. She was around 18 stone, and a big lady indeed, and had a huge influence on Flora. There are many quotes about her which seem to be larger than life, frankly. Yes, I think they're probably genuine. She was pretty sharp, and I think she gave a huge amount of guidance to Flora, and gave Flora the chance to be a letter carrier rather than just a post office servant in the post office. And Flora, and the book brings it across, her love of the countryside and great understanding of the countryside, which probably came about from her Lark Rise youth. And she was only 14 when she moved to Fringford, very young. But she really matured over that time. And the other thing, of course, was that she had a very limited community in Lark Rise, which she enjoyed and all that. But in Fringford, population maybe 300, she probably knew almost all of the 300 people, I think. The forge is very central to the village, and everybody knew Keziah, that's for sure. And husband was a sort of successful blacksmith. So it opened up a huge range of things for her. I didn't mention, of course, working for the post, she had to sign on, which meant this ordeal of going up to Shelswell, and Shelswell benefits, and Shelswell is the core of this local community, really. And she had to go and have an interview with Edward Slater Harrison, which she recalls in very warm tones. He was obviously a lovely man, and knew she was very nervous. And the description, well, as so much in Flora and Lark Rise, is always as good as you get. Yes.
So just tell us more about these letters. So we have the books, but you found letters and other such things.
Yes. I can't quite remember the original connection with the Whitton family, but one way or another, I did meet them. And the lady who had the sort of control of the letters lived up in Newark, which happens to where my family come from. And gradually, I talked my way into meeting her. And I got her to agree. And we made photocopies in the square in Newark there, actually, yes, of a couple of ones. And other ones I got transcript of and what have you. And they're very revealing of the life led by Keziah. I mean, I might mention just along the way that she had two sons. She had two sons, and they went to school at Fringford, which was a new national school, and they were the first pupils there. And then, very surprisingly, age 16, they were sent to a free grammar school in Buckinghamshire, Courting Hall. I mean, it ties in with the great ambition for many of the tradesmen and middle class, if you like, to expand the education of their children. And she was obviously very ambitious. And they had to go as boarders. And both did very well. One tragically went to Ghana in Africa and got a disease and died within 3 weeks. And he was working for the Treasury, and which was quite an achievement for a blacksmith's son. And the other one went to Liverpool and became one of the customs officers and was very successful. Given the success of Liverpool at the time, I mean, a customs officer was quite something. And his children were all privately educated. And George figured largely in one whom Keziah relied on. There's this correspondence with him. And she's always worrying about money or about not having room for the grandchildren. You know, it's very human stuff. And she was an incorrigible gossip. I mean, she just knew just exactly what was going on. And 5 days before she died, she struggled down to the manor, which the chap had died there, and the house was for sale. And she was determined to see what it looked like and what was happening. And there was also a new squire, and she wanted to find out about him. 5 days later, she was dead. Yeah.
You have a letter in your hand.
A very important letter. It's the only original letter written by Flora Thompson that I know of, and I was very lucky to receive it by a chance connection, really. A lady who was the niece of Miss Eagle. Miss Eagle was addressed in the book. And Miss Eagle was a very distinguished school teacher in Oxford and clearly asked some very serious questions of Flora. And Flora, in a delightful answer, Lark Rise is, as far as I could make it, a faithful portrait of the little Oxfordshire hamlet where I spent my childhood. Juniper Hill near Brackley. In Candleford Green and Candleford, I wrote more freely, intending to give rather a picture of country life at that time and to portray some of the country characters I'd known than to describe any particular town. There was something both of Banbury and Bicester and more of Buckingham in my picture of Candleford. It was actually to Buckingham we went in the spring cart, and some or all my relatives lived there. I hope you will not be disappointed to find Candleford still somewhat elusive, with many thanks for your interest in the places. Yours sincerely. It's a gem of a letter, and answers one of the ever asked questions of how true to life is what she wrote. And clearly Juniper Hill is the one that is most authentic, and the others have they convey the impression, but there are adjustments. Yeah.
So there's some notable people here, interesting characters that tell us something about the real Candleford Green. So Gladys Hinks was one of them.
Gladys Hinks was a lady who died aged 99 just a few years ago. And she was a cook for the school and also a cook after that for the brigadier, I think, who commanded the unit in Bicester. And she lived in the village all her life, never married. She and her mother ran a small shop, I think, which started with a sale of one bottle of something or one tin of something, and never expanded very much, but lived in Mansfield Yard down near the church. And we'd have regular tea parties with Gladys and Judy Standen, who was father had been the schoolmaster, and we'd chat about this and that. And then I'd say, "You never mentioned that before, Gay. You weren't ready." And I realised that I was being put through a gradual process here, actually, yes. And by the end, I mean, I saw her just before she died, and she said, "I never thought I'd have a friend like you," which was very sweet. And I learned all sorts of stuff about the local village and who people were and what went on. Yeah. The Price family were probably the most successful business running in the village. They were glaziers, painters, decorators, almost everything. And by sheer luck, I was offered a set of books that had been found in the old post office, not the later one on Rectory Lane. And these proved to be the business records of the Price family, which I've looked at in considerable detail. And they were very successful and lovely family. And they took on the post office at one stage too, after Flora left. But Flora would have certainly known the Price family. Mrs. Price particularly was known, very good communicator and very friendly and very popular. So she would certainly have met her. And then down at the end of the village by the church was the old Mansfield grocery store. This was started by George Mansfield, who was a carrier, I think, initially. And his wife really ran the grocery store. And it was a very successful business, finally finished when the Lady Mansfield died in, I think, 1911, something like that. So there was a great range of people that she was meeting, and very successful people. She also met the new vicar. We'd had a series of very wealthy vicars. It was quite a well-paid benefice, actually. I mean, you were talking sort of £400 to £500 a year, which was pretty good money in those days. But these people who came were exceptional by any standards, actually. The main man was a man called Roundell, who came of a big landowning family in Yorkshire. And he spent a fortune on rebuilding the rectory and also the church. And after that, the son of an Italian countess, de Salis, and then Coker is a very well-known Bicester family. Cadwallader Coker was the one who died in the early 1890s. So Flora possibly have known him. But Charles Thompson, who took over in the mid-1890s, was a very different character, much more down to earth, likely to go around in his shirt sleeves. And that would, to the Victorian victors, would have been absolutely non-allowed. And so she writes about him and said he was possibly one of the best preachers in whole of Oxfordshire, I think. Quite a startling character. And he got the young boys playing cricket. And you'd find him, giving ladies a lift with their heavy bags or whatever they were doing, or the washing, and completely open character. But he left, I think, after 4 or 5 years. But he left quite a mark and a complete change from Victorian. Now, Charles Freeman, he was, his parents ran a shop on the Green, and he was a labourer, at least until the early 90s when he emigrated to Canada. I don't know how many years he was there exactly, but he came back with serious suffering from frozen legs and what have you, and he could only just about stagger around with a supporting frame. And he managed to do all the carving in the church of the ends of the pews, the walls to the vestry, and the chancel, mostly just lying on his bum. I mean, he was remarkable. All done between about 1901 and I think 1911 he died. Yeah. And supported by the squire, I think. Chinnery was the new squire, and I think he paid his wages and what have you. But it was an astonishing piece of work. I mean, it really is very beautifully done, and by a man who, when did he learn his carving abilities? Perhaps he learned it in Canada, I don't know. Maybe while he was a labourer, I don't know. But anyway, he's obviously very skilled, yes.
So it's well worth going into the church and having a look. There is a notice on the wall commemorating him. Jimmy Grantham.
Jimmy Grantham, yes, was the local carrier, and he lived just down from the forge. Well, what they call Bakery Cottage. It never was a bakery, but the lady who was living in it thought because there was an oven that it must have been a bakery, which it wasn't. Anyway, Jimmy was a carrier from probably from the 1880s, doing regular rounds to Banbury and the local villages, Buckingham and Bicester, and had a regular order from Keziah Whitton for a dozen of those Banbury cakes. And but Jimmy and his son took over from him for a while and continued, and I think he was also a coal merchant. But again, I don't think that's something mentioned, the ability of people to do 2 or 3 jobs in their life, multitasking, yeah. And very impressively so, yeah.
So we talked about some of these people who give us a flavour of what the village was like, and that you mentioned with their multitasking. But not everybody would find work locally, and you found evidence of large-scale migration.
Yes, I got fascinated, really. Well, having been an emigrant myself, I mean, it's always interested me. But in the churchyard, I met a couple from Queensland, and they came round and had coffee and whatever, we talked. And Grace, who was the lady, took great trouble to write a lengthy screed about the butlers, and because the 4 brothers who were sons of a cordwainer in Fringford, and 4 emigrated during the 70s. They went up to Liverpool in stages, and one brother who wasn't married was sent ahead, gave the okay, and that was it. Interestingly, the sister, Sarah Butler Renison, worked at the forge, and I became a letter carrier, I think, just around the time that Flora was leaving, because a specific mention to Sarah and not getting on with somebody else, and Keziah complaining about how difficult it is with staff not getting on, both in the post office and in the forge. Yes, so that gave me an opening really into looking at emigration general, because I got an awful lot of information about what the Butler family did, and the sending the one brother ahead, and then they do meet up. And then if there isn't a job in one place on the coast, they move up to the next place on the coast. And so they keep working further north and end up on the Murray River, a little island up there, which is one of the brothers was the first white man actually to live on it. It was all part of the migration, really. I mean, they were very enterprising, these people.
So one of the things you've done is you've created tables of occupation locally of people, what they do. So these are people in domestic service or other trades in the village, and just shown over time how that has changed. So that links in with who can stay, who realistically can make a go of things, and then who has to move on.
Yes, I mean, the pattern in the earlier days is very steady. Maybe 70% are farm labourers, if not more than that. But gradually that reduces as tractors and other mechanical machines arrive on the scene, and other economics, imports mainly, drive down the success of the farmers. So that's a notable change, and at the end of, well, what in many ways was quite a happy period, I suppose, in the 1860s. The farmers were happy, and the people working for the farmers were happy. But that's not entirely true. There's one of the sons of the local farmer emigrated to Argentina in the early 1850s. The only reason I discovered that was somebody found the gravestone mentioning the chap who'd been in Buenos Aires. And there was a big move to Argentina in that period, the 1850s, apparently. But he came back and died here. So emigration was going well. It then had a huge boost with all the farmers' strikes in the 1870s and in the 1890s, and the huge increase in farm products coming in from the colonies.
So one of the big changes that took place was in travel, and you mention in your book about railways and the use of bicycles.
Yeah, bicycles. Well, that was a very notable increase, I think. Was it the late 1890s and then the early 1900s? I mean, a huge influx of bikes and people riding bikes, but not women for the most part. Although it is thought that Flora used to ride a bicycle and go down to the Bicester Library. But this, of course, it changed people's lives, there's no question of that, and was a huge success right through the Edwardian period.
One of the things we've seen since then, actually in her time, was housing, a massive increase in housing here.
Yes, I mean, we're being pestered all the time to build, X number of houses to expand the village. But in the early 50s, this village must have looked very depressing, I think. I mean, many of these old Victorian or much earlier cottages, I mean, they're going back to the 17th century or earlier, some of them, were falling down, and nobody really had the money to rebuild them. And it's in the 50s that you start having the council houses. And the top end of the village is completely dates from that period, bar from the pub and the neighbouring cottage to that, which transformed living for the labouring class particularly, and completely changed the character of the village as well.
So presumably now we have a change in travel, motor cars and so on, and as a result, people, they don't just have to live here.
No, not at all. Well, a number of people were working away. The Plums, who took over the forge, he was a very good mechanic, and he went to work for Morris, and he was involved in the development programs with Isigonis building the Mini. There were only 3 cars in the village in the 1930s, all bull-nosed Morrises, I think.
One of the things that Flora mentions, often in passing in the books, is, well, it's the death of Edmund, her brother, and yes, in the book as well as in real life, and also other people who died in the First World War. You've also compiled a Roll of Honour.
Yes. Well, it's such a significant part in the history. My father was in the Flying Corps in 1918. Fortunately, he never flew across the Channel. Otherwise, I wouldn't probably be here. But it's probably one of the most moving passages in Lark Rise, which you can only appreciate if you're actually in the church and can actually read it, which I did on a number of occasions, because it's a description by Flora of looking at the new plaque which lists the people from Candleford who died, and bottom of the list on his own is her brother. I mean, it's enough to make you weep. I mean, you can just see her. It must have been in the early 20s when they put it up, I suppose, just looking at it.
And she's writing that as the Second World War is starting.
Yes, it is. I mean, and just to finish the thing, when I showed around the village the Laura, who was Olivia Hallinan, who were in the script, and I looked up, and she was sitting in the seat where Flora sat. And I think that, well, apart from anything else, it gave her a huge work-up call. I mean, she wasn't a historian or anything like that, but to be sitting where Flora had sat, because Flora was able to look out of the open door and see the birds flying and hear the sounds. And the naturalist that she was, she would love all that. And this was where Olivia Allen was sitting, you know. But yes, I mean, the Candleford numbers of deaths, there was a local historian living in the village who looked at, you know, the percentage of deaths was incredibly high. I mean, I think 11 lost their lives, which in a village that small, there were a couple of hundred, I mean, 120 people maybe in Jubilee Hill, but the numbers were very, very, very high. I mean, we lost 5 or 6. I mean, that would be perhaps a routine number, but when you think of all the people affected by that, and they're all local boys, yeah, I mean, a huge effect on the village.
The Fringford we see now, is it a close-knit village now?
It's I think it's improving in a way. The cricket team is actually very successful. It's had its ups and downs, but it's got a very good run going. It's run in Fringford, and it's plays in at least 3 different competitions, I think. So that brings people together, no question of that. When you look at all the classes that are run in the village hall, yes, I mean, anything you want to do to keep fit is probably there. There's a regular film show, and there's a separate room now which has been redeveloped, and that's an exhibition room. And there's a permanent exhibition about the village, mainly about Flora. I say that the WI is well supported. I mean, the school is a unifying atmosphere, if you like, because there's a new playground open by the school, in the last 10 years anyway, and there's always a crowd there after school. Candleford Fair they have in the summer, and a beer festival, yes.
You've written these books. What are you going to do now?
Well, the only writing I'm doing, I'm writing a series of articles about Flora and people she would have known in the village. So much you can learn from the people, can't you? Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think I've learned a few things. So, Martin Greenwood, thank you very much.
Thank you, actually. Yes, it's nice to recall, or endeavour to recall.